So as we're gathering here together from all over different places, we can also gather in ourselves, letting our bodies arrive, making ourselves comfortable. And just allowing ourselves to settle here. Really honoring our own intention to arrive here in a sense of listening to our own body, our own heart, with kindness, to connect here with other beings in a sense of listening and reflecting together. So we can just sit quietly for a couple of minutes while other people join us. And then I'll give a bit of an introduction and continue from there. Okay, so welcome all of you to this Sacred Mountain Sangha Sunday Sangha. So I know a lot of you come here regularly, but just for anybody who's new, to extend a warm welcome and say I'm Sumedha. I'm one of the core teachers with Sacred Mountain Sangha. And this is like an hour's session that there'll be some chanting, which is very much part of the practice with Sacred Mountain Sangha, and a guided meditation, and then a Dharma reflection. And I did a reflection last week on the theme of simplicity of mind, linked to simplifying and renunciation in our own being. And I'll continue that theme this week with some more kind of practical ways of looking into it. So, and then so the session will end at 10 a.m. Pacific time, and then there'll be 15 minutes if you want to stay on for questions or discussion or sharing afterwards. So we'll start with some chanting. So I'll just so thank you. Michael has just put the chanting booklet in the chat so that you can access it there. And I will also share the chanting booklet on screen. Can everybody see that? Yeah, wonderful. Right, just make sure I can scroll down. Ooh. Oh, no. All right. So, as those of you who have been here before know, I chant in the Thai style, and so we'll chant together the refuges as we often do. And this is a really beautiful way of bringing the vibrations of the refuges into our hearts. These have been chanted over millennia by different beings, and so it's a really lovely way of deepening into this. So we'll start with the refuges and then the reflection on the triple jewel. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Dhammang saranang gacchāmi. Sanghang saranang gacchāmi. Dutiyampi buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Dutiyampi dhammang saranang gacchāmi. Dutiyampi sanghang saranang gacchāmi. Tatiyampi buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchāmi. Tatiyampi sanghang saranang gacchāmi. And then we can go down to the recollection of the triple jewel, which is on page 4. Iti piso bhagava arahang samma sambuddho vijacharana sampanno sugato lokavidu anutaro purisadhamma sarati sata deva manusanam buddho bhagava Tisawakato bhagavata dhammo sanditiko akaliko ehipasiko panayiko pachatang veditabo vinyuhiti supatipano bhagavato sawakasango ujjupatipano bhagavato sawakasango nyayapatipano bhagavato sawakasango samichipatipano bhagavato sawaka sango yadidam chatari purisa yugania ta purisa pugala Isa bhagavato sawaka sango huneyo dakineyo anjali karaniyo anutarang punyaketam lokasati. And then bringing that sense of the awakened heart with us, we can, and the teachings and the community, we can go down to some of the teaching chants. So this, I wanted to chant the 5 subjects for frequent recollection, which is on page 7. This is quite a particular chant. As you know, the Buddha invited us to really come back and look at the tender reality of our human condition, not as a depressing thing, but as a way of us awakening as to the fragility and the potential of our awakenedness here. So so we can chant this together. It's a very simple tune, and with a lot of tenderness. I am of the nature to age. I have not gone beyond aging. I am of the nature to sicken. I have not gone beyond sickness. I am of the nature to die. I have not gone beyond dying. All that is mine, beloved and pleasing, will become otherwise, will become separated from me. I am the owner of my karma, heir to my karma, born of my karma, related to my karma, abide supported by my karma. Whatever karma I shall do, for good or for ill, of that I will be the heir. Thus we should frequently recollect. And then the chant on the diffusion of the suffusion with divine abiding. So the 4 boundless qualities on page 8. This is the heart with which we can receive our fragility. So these are the 4 boundless qualities: loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. Into our hearts, through our hearts, back out into this universe we're part of, to all the beings in this universe who are suffering, all the sentient beings, to the very nature that we're part of. I will abide, pervading 1/4, with a heart imbued with loving kindness. Likewise the 2nd, likewise the 3rd, likewise the 4th, so above and below, around and everywhere, and to all as to myself. I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world, with a heart imbued with loving kindness, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. I will abide, pervading 1/4, with a heart imbued with compassion, likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth, so above and below, around and everywhere, and to all as to myself. I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world, with a heart imbued with compassion, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. I will abide, pervading 1/4, with a heart imbued with gladness, likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth, so above and below, around and everywhere, and to all as to myself. I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world, with a heart imbued with gladness, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. I will abide, pervading 1/4, with a heart imbued with equanimity, likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth, so above and below, around and everywhere, and to all as to myself. I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world, with a heart imbued with equanimity, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. So just letting the energy and the vibrations of those chants settle into our beings. Seeing how their resonance touches you. And without there being a right or a wrong. Just allowing yourself to gather here. A bit like a pool of water settling and allowing gravity to invite our body to rest and settle with the earth underneath us, holding us. Noticing your posture. And noticing that without judging or criticizing, we can attend to our body with kindness. Where does it need some support? Where might we need to stretch a little bit, open a little bit, settle a little bit? I wanted to touch on one of the meditations offered in the first foundation of mindfulness on body, where we're invited to pay attention to how much we are part of the elemental world. So noticing that which is heavy within us, that which is solid on our bones, or our nails. It's kind of solid and earthy. And we're coming away from a habitual sense of our body, habitual sense of ourself, and noticing our bones, our nails, our teeth. So that which is quite hard and solid. Just this solidity of our body that the Buddha said we can call the earth element inside. And notice how these bones are resting on the earth outside. This earth that nourishes us with food. Just let our minds connect. This sense of the earthiness inside and the earthiness outside. Where are we so separate? The water element is very tangible. So the water in our mouth, the water in our eyes, the liquid nature of our blood as it's circulating in our body. We can really give attention to this. Tears when we cry. And the perspiration on the surface of our body. And the water within us and the water around us. Water outside. And the moisture in the air or rain. When we drink a glass of water. We can really invite our attention to touch these perceptions and to play with the question of where are we so separate? And we feel the support of the earth underneath us, coming into us, the water that we're nourished by and that is part of us. And the support of this and the care that can open in this connection. It's different perception of our being. Or the air element. We can go quite a long time without food and maybe a few days without water. But we are dependent. And air, we're breathing every moment. And we feel this air coming into our body, air in our lungs, circulating through our being. Bringing life, bringing energy, vibrating. Going back out again. Where are we so separate? Very gently touch this reality of deep connectedness in our being. The support, the care that can arise then. Or the warmth, the fire element. Notice how fragile we are with temperature. very quickly we're too hot or we're too cold. We have this fire element within us, that which is digesting, which is warming. And we're also very dependent on the fire, the warmth outside, cool. So we humbly touch this reality. And see what this does in our heart. Lastly, I also really like to contemplate the space element. And this meditation is presented sometimes differently at different points in the text. The space element is sometimes mentioned. And we notice the space around our body. This welcoming space that is always here for us, not judging, just receiving. And space. How often do we notice the space in our being? And the space in our nostrils, the space around our heart, for our heart to beat. The space in our lungs to receive the air. And space in our listening to receive, to pay attention. We have room in our being. And if we forget the space around our body, can touch, remind, open us. Space inside, space outside. Why are we so separate? And yet we are here in our also unique form. So as we end the meditation, feeling our deep connectedness and also this our own body here, this unique form, each one with our own little bundle of mind, body, deeply connected and also unique. Grounding here in our listening and our embodiedness. And when you're ready, you can end the meditation. Just bringing that sense of listening, of groundedness with us as we open our eyes, connect with each other, with the space. So I wanted to give a few Dharma reflections. So as those of you who were here last week know, I introduced the theme of simplicity of mind or renunciation, not as a kind of heavy subject, but like in the sense that like we're always making choices of some sort. We're choosing what we want to let go of and what we want to cultivate in our being. So renunciation is often not a very popular topic, and it can also be seen as something, oh, well, it's just related to a monastic practice. But actually, for me, it's a very alive thread in can we make choices that are coming from like a place in our being that we're listening with clarity, we're deeply connecting. So that deep alignment, and that can affect our choices, which we're always making anyway. So so a few of the ways in which I talked about renunciation last week were drawn from different teachers. So I'll just go very quickly through those for anyone who wasn't there. So Ajahn Sucitto talks about renunciation as being related to creating a sanctuary of our heart and mind. So a place where what we're in touch with is like there's a sense of the sacredness of that connection. So that's slowing down and coming into a connection where our heart is really present. And that actually can, conversely to the idea of renunciation, is like a kind of a harshness. It can bring a real fullness of presence that can very much slow down the endless impulse to keep getting, we're never satisfied, and there's something about being able to slow down and be in genuine contact where we are that can bring a fullness of presence. So my main teacher, Ajahn Sumedha, used to say, kiss the joy as it flies. So quoted William Blake. So the problem is not the joy or the contact, it's the grasping that we add onto it, really. And Gil Fronsdale talks about renunciation as very much being related to a sense of lightening, unburdening, freeing. Those are different translations he gives. And it's related actually to a growing a sense of joy and lightness. And similarly, Tanisaro Bhikkhu talks about, he's got an article called Trading Candy for Gold, where he talks about, so we're letting go of certain things, say, that we may be questioning, is this helpful for us or not? And in that, we can be gaining a greater happiness. And so like we're learning to let go of certain things, and we're also in that we are cultivating certain things. So a very good example of this was, I read out a particular a translation of the precepts last week, the first 5 precepts that I heard from Jaya Radgard. And just to read the first one, because it can give a sense of this, okay, so it's training to let go a little, and we're also gaining something. So the first one, which is related with harmlessness, we can translate as like, I undertake the training to refrain from intentionally taking the life of any living being. And then in a positive sense, may I treat all life with kindness, care, and respect. So it's that, I'm leaning out of something and I'm leaning into something at the same time. What am I cultivating? And the Buddha talked about 4 great efforts, so things that we might want to restrain and abandon. And in that, things that we might want to maintain and develop. And all of this for me relates around the tendencies that we have towards actually coming out of connection with our genuineness in life and adding a whole lot of what the Buddha classically called greed, hatred, and delusion. So last week I mentioned the fire sermon where the Buddha talks about the senses being on fire with greed, hatred, and delusion, which is a very startling message. And it can be very, very true in some of the way our society functions. And then he also gave another teaching, the Bahia Sutta, where our senses can be a place of like, in the scene, let there be just the scene. So the contact is much more simple. In the heard, let there be just the heard. In the cognized, let there be just the cognized. So a much more simple place of contact. And this is really, so it's about, for me, it's a lot about how we approach our experience and the qualities we bring to the kind of contact we have in life. So I know in the send out that Michael sent, he talked about papancha, so which is what often, it's like what we add to experience, so the proliferation. And Tanisro Bhikkhu very interestingly talks about it as when we objectify, we make ourselves an object, we make everything else an object. And so we use it, and it's a place of conflict. And the Buddha didn't stop in that teaching. He taught ways of coming underneath that way of experience so that we can be actually approaching life from a way of wise attention. So the contact that we have, we're wisely attending to it. We can pause and see, are we adding something harmful here? So in brief, that's what I was explaining last week. And this week I wanted to talk about some more like quite concrete ways or practices of starting to look into our experience in which we can start to come to this place of simplicity of content. So I hope that makes some sense. It was a very quick précis. So, and so the first way in which I wanted to talk about how we can kind of come to a much simpler place of, well, what is this being actually? You know, so we built up all these images of ourselves and what we want and what we don't want and what our practice is, etc., etc. And the first, a very powerful practice for me has been this way of starting to come into our body. So the first foundation of mindfulness is body. And as I just guided in that meditation, one of the ways of starting to explore our sense of who we are actually is coming to a much simpler sense of our body. So in an elemental way. So for me, when I first heard this elements practice, I was like, oh yeah, another practice on the long list of practices that I could be doing. And then one day I had a kind of revelation experience with it where I was like, oh God, water element. The water in my body is the same as the water that is falling from the sky. The water in my eyes, the water in my flesh. And so even if that practice feels a little bit distant to you, I would really, really recommend giving some time and attention to say where the earth is underneath you supporting your body, where your flesh is touching the earth, where the air is entering our body. So as we were doing in the guided meditation, because what this can start to do is for me, what it did was actually create a huge sense of safety in my being. So we've all got places in our body that are maybe traumatized, that are difficult to access. Body can feel like quite an unsafe space sometimes. And yet embodied practice is like really, it's really vital for me in gaining a wiser and a more connected perspective on our being. And so the elements practice can really open a sense of interconnectedness. It can open how supported we are. It can open channels of care towards this planet that we're part of. So in Joanna Macy's book, Active Hope, she talks about, I probably won't pronounce this correctly, but Arne Naes, who's a Norwegian, I think he's Norwegian, and he was one of the founders of deep ecology. And just that sense of, if we sense ourselves as part of this living, breathing planet, you know, so our sense of self is not isolated, how does that affect our actions? So this elements practice can very directly both bring us into a more supportive relationship with the nature we're part of, and we are immediately more supported. We get more perspective, or we can get more perspective on our habits of mind that are maybe harmful. So this can be very, very powerful, and also brings us into the realm of, like with the 5 elements teaching chant there, we are vulnerable to old age, we are vulnerable to sickness, we are vulnerable to death. And this is, in a way, it is asking us to renounce our the ways in which we protect ourselves from that. So these were said to be heavenly messengers by the Buddha, things that can wake us up when they're met with a heart of awareness. So they're not easy to meet, but what they do is that they bring us into our shared humanity and into a deeper capacity for compassion, because for me, unless we're willing to feel our own fragilities, then we're always going to defend a little bit against, you know, the way in which this can actually connect us deeply in life. So that's not to say it's a pleasant experience. So grief, as many of us know, is a very difficult experience, but it's one of the things that fundamentally connects us also. We all lose beings. We all are aging. And so how do we meet this in a heartful way, in a connected way? So this can, for me, is a very powerful invitation towards humility and compassion. And this comes through a connected body practice where we're renouncing a little bit of, like, okay, well, I'm Sumedha and I'm 50 years old and I really quite like how I look, you know, and whatever. We're renouncing that, and we're coming to a much more elemental, connected, real base, actually. Or do I need to put my anti-aging cream on? I don't have anti-aging cream, you know, but the harm that we do with those things, you know, we use like whale blubber or fetal tissue in anti-aging products, you know, and because we don't want to age. And where is the greater harm? You know, it's like, so this is really worth looking into, this whole area of body, of elements, and coming to a much simpler, more connected sense of our being. And then the second area that we can really look into is, last week I did a short guided meditation around senses. And like with the Bahia Sutta, that sense of, we can meet that which is arising with a sense of spaciousness. So sound is a really helpful one for this, a bit like Kuan Yin, listening to the sounds of the world, that when a sound arises and we can receive it with spaciousness, we can start to see what we're adding. Is this causing harm, or is it for well-being? And interestingly, so I don't have that much time to go into it much more, but interestingly, a thought is the mind is a sense object in Buddhism. And so as the eye sees, as the ear hears, the mind thinks, which can be really helpful for forgiving ourselves for our busy minds, but also that as a sound arises and we can receive it in spaciousness. So that meditation guidance is there from last week. Thoughts arise and we can receive those with a sense of spaciousness, and we can start to see what we're adding that may be harmful. So this is linked to renunciation in that it's asking us to simplify, but with a very beautiful heart, How can I receive what is arising in my mind with more spaciousness, more compassionate and clear attention? So there's the simplifying, the letting go, and there's also a gaining of presence and discernment, wise attention. So, and this leads to the third thing I wanted to point to, which is just really when that in our practice, it's a huge gift to be able to simplify and notice our awareness itself. So that which is knowing. So this can be just like noticing the spaciousness of awareness. It can also be linked with the beautiful Kuan Yin practice of spaciousness and response, which is linked to this movement of being able to see where are we adding greed, hatred, delusion, that which is harmful to something. And this really leads on to the fourth area that I want to say a bit more about, which is really practicing with the mind, with this mind that has a tendency to go into this thing papancha, which one translation is just proliferation. So we get that impression of the train. You know, you have something arises in your mind or in your experience, and you react, and then the whole train goes on from there. And there is an invitation in the teaching to start to notice, okay, so what is arising? How will we be meeting it? And how does that whole train go on? So Tanisaro in the article that is in the references from last week, he talks about papancha as this objectification, that then we go into a train of something that very often causes conflict, because there's a fixed identity in it. We're like, I am this and that is that, and so the two things are going to bump together. Whereas the Buddha then invites us to come underneath that into recognizing that we are processes. So he talks about dependent origination, where we have a capacity to meet what is arising and say at certain points in the chain of dependent origination, so say at contact, so say a sense object arises, we have a contact and we can notice the feeling that happens. Is it nice? Is it not nice? And then the reaction that happens, I want to get away from it, or I want more of it. And we can start to slow down that process and really look into, is this for well-being or is it for affliction? So the Buddha invites us to cultivate wise attention. And there's a very beautiful teaching to his son, Rahula, it's in the Majjhima Nikaya, I think it's 61. And he says, like, what does a mirror do? And Rahula, I think he's 7, Rahula at this point. He says a mirror reflects. And the Buddha says that's right. And so, like, when we're engaged in bodily action, mental action, bodily, verbal, or mental action, before we act, while we're acting, and after we're acting, we can be reflecting, is this causing affliction for myself, for other beings, or for both? Is this giving rise to well-being for my own being, for other beings, or for both? And so this is a way of really, really slowing down and undercutting the chain of habits. And for me, it's a very compassionate place. It's not well, this should be or shouldn't be. It's like we fully receive, and we fully, with our heart that is listening and is aligned with a sense of connectedness, start to question with tenderness, is this for well-being or is it for harm? So that's not a right and a wrong. It's not an exclusivity. It's the heart's capacity to discern, which is very, very beautiful, and to find some peacefulness in that process. And so there's a very, very good book on the process of dependent origination by somebody called P.A Payutto. and it's just called Dependent Origination. It's available on PDF on the internet. And he's got a lovely example of this in daily life. So just to say quickly, it's like two young boys at school, I think, or at work. And one's called John and one's called Ian. And he just describes really beautifully how John, he's had a difficult experience. He comes to work or to school and he's not looking good. And Ian takes it personally. And so this kicks off a whole process in Ian where he's like, oh, he's got this facial expression because he's upset with me, and this creates an identity, and then it creates conflict. And in this example, it's just really beautifully unpacked how actually Ian has just not understood the cause of John's facial expression, and how he could look into the point of contact and really slow down and realize that he's adding something there. What is he adding that is causing conflict? So this is, it's a very real example for me of how we can slow down and notice what we're adding that is maybe causing more suffering in our own world or in the world we're part of, or not. So we're letting go of certain things, and we're also making space for more aligned reactions, more harmless reactions. So I could say a lot more, but we're running out of time. So, but just this reminder that this can be a real invitation back into our shared humanity, and an invitation towards like an inner cultivation that then can come through in our actions. And so there's a lovely quote from John Lennon that says something like, peace is not something you wish for, it's something you make, something you do, something you are, and something you give away. So I'll just end with that.